Good morning, everybody. We are letting people in, so give us a minute and we will start. Um, just dropped a note in the chat. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat, you're welcome to. Let us know who you are, uh, anything. Sorry, I'm letting people in.
Yes, Annette. Mm-hmm.
So give us a minute. People are coming
Yep.
in.
I know we want to be respectful of time, but maybe with maybe give it a few minutes.
Yeah. So when this slows down, okay, I think it's starting to slow down. It's hard to. Okay, I'm just going to keep an eye on the waiting room, but I'm going to go ahead and start. First, thank you all for joining. We're very excited about this webinar and excited that Dr. Kempter was able to join us and share more about this amazing report that they have done. So, thank you. Let me go here. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to multitask and let people in while presenting. Okay. Okay, so a little bit about us, and I'm going to be very fast because I want to let Dr. Kenter have most of the time because that's what we're here about. But Resilient Virginia, we are a statewide nonprofit. Um, our mission is to catalyze collective action to enhance systems level resilience across the state. Um, we connect people, resources, and ideas to create more resilient communities, environments, and economics. We do this through multiple programs, a lot of education. Um, sorry, there we go. Okay. And different programs. You can find out more about all of these on our website. I'm just going to go real quick to the next slide. Our vision is empowered communities exceed resilience benchmarks and embody whole community resilience. And that's what we work for in all that we do. Sorry, I'm not the best at multitasking. There we go. So I'm going to just turn it over to Dr. Kenter. He is the director of the Virginia Climate Center and director of the Center for Ocean, Land, Atmosphere Studies at George Mason University. He is going to share about this amazing report. I am going to stop sharing and I'm going to let him share his screen. Thank you, Dr. Kenter.
Great. Thanks, Trish. Thanks very much to Resilient Virginia for inviting me to your Spotlight series. I'm not so good at multitasking either, so let me get this screen sharing thing going here.
During our meeting on Friday.
Share.
Yes, if you are not speaking, if you could go ahead and mute, that would be great. I can't come around and mute you though if you forget. So if all of a sudden I mute you, sorry. Thanks, guys.
Okay, great. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, like I said, thanks very much to Resilient Virginia for inviting me, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to just give a brief presentation and then I'll allow time for questions to talk about the first Virginia climate assessment. I'm giving this talk, but I wanted to first and foremost point out that I'm only a spokesperson for a very large group, a multidisciplinary group that extends across multiple institutions here in Virginia and beyond. So our motivation for thinking about how to produce a Virginia climate assessment was two things. One, we have since 1990, when Congress passed the Global Change Research Act, we've had a series of national climate assessments that have come out. The fifth one came out in 2023, pictured there on the left. And these are efforts by very large groups of scientists to assess the latest state of the science, evaluating peer-reviewed literature, and providing data and information about the state of the climate in the United States, broken down into fairly broad sectors. Virginia, for example, is part of the southeastern region in the National Climate Assessment Series. A couple of states have gone to the further extent of producing their own state climate assessments. And just here's one example, the 2024 Climate Impact Assessment Report for Nebraska. Virginia has no statewide climate assessment has been done, and we don't actually have a state climate office to undertake such an effort. So what we did was we took it upon ourselves to organize an activity intended to produce the first Virginia climate assessment. It is just like the National Climate Assessment and the state climate assessments that exist, a science-based evaluation of the ways that Virginia's climate has been in the past, how it is today, how we anticipate it changing in the future, and how that change in the climate will impact Virginia and its people. So we began this work in April of this year, and it was published just a couple of weeks ago. So it was really a very rapid effort to bring people together and produce this report. It was also extensively reviewed by experts from both here in Virginia and outside. And we believe it's the first report of its kind to establish a baseline for Virginia's weather and climate conditions that we hope will serve as sort of the initial attempt at understanding Virginia's climate for future such activities. This slide also has a number of statistics. The report is about 90 pages long, organized into 9 chapters. We have 26 authors, and I'll show you the list in a minute, from 8 different institutions. We also asked about 20 people to review, and we received reviews from 14 people, again, from a very large number of different academic institutions and government entities. The report itself actually reviews over 300 peer-reviewed scientific articles that are pertinent to Virginia specifically and Virginia's climate. And just we got some statistics just yesterday, and let me see if I can get this up on the screen there. There we go. Just in the last couple of weeks since it's been published, the report has had 1,500 web visits and 205 downloads. So it's certainly getting some traction. This is the list of authors. I want to particularly thank P. Roos, who really spearheaded this effort. P is a postdoc at George Mason. And then my other co-leads for the report, Luis Ortiz and Celso Ferreira. We had chapter lead authors who took the lead on each of the primary content chapters. And you can see from the list of names, these are people from George Mason as well as from other universities across Virginia and nonprofit organizations. And then our chapter contributing authors are listed on the right. And you see, again, we have representation from a large number of different institutions. I also want to thank our reviewers. This just like the volunteer effort that was undertaken by our authors, we asked a number of people to provide reviews, and we got, I would say, extremely thoughtful and in-depth reviews from all the people listed here, as well as 3 anonymous reviewers. And finally, I want to thank our whole team in the Virginia Climate Center and George Mason, but also in particular the late Honorable Jerry Connolly, his U.S. House of Representatives representative for the Fairfax region, Northern Virginia. And Jerry was an enormously supportive of George Mason University and the Virginia Climate Center, and he was instrumental in helping us obtain congressionally directed community support. Unfortunately, Jerry passed away earlier this year, and so we really dedicated this report to his memory. I also want to thank Sophia Whitaker and Amy Ware, who produced all the graphics and formatted the report, did proofreading, just a yeoman's effort to get this report across the finish line. And finally, I'll also thank Amanda O'Connor, who was in charge of this report when we got it started in April. Her family moved to the West Coast and she followed suit, took a job in Washington State. So she wasn't able to help us with the end of the report, but she certainly got us off to a good start. So what is it? What is this report that we keep talking about? This is an attempt to characterize the climate of Virginia, not as a single entity, but we actually broke the state down into 6 relatively homogeneous climate divisions that are shown in the map there on the right. These are the climate divisions that are used by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration for defining climate zones within Virginia, as well as in the other states in the United States. And we wanted to emphasize the diversity of Virginia because as we look at the National Climate Assessment, which lumps Virginia together with many other states in the southeastern portion of the country, Virginia has its own characteristics, unique characteristics, and diverse activities going on across the state. Nearly 9 million people, elevations ranging from sea level in the Tidewater region to over 5,700 feet in the Mountain West, forested areas, agricultural lands, urban areas, wetlands, coastal zones, and of course, tidal rivers. We have a variety of different crops that are grown across the state that are all sensitive to climate variability and climate extremes. And we have a very diverse economy within the state. And I like to point out, it was pointed out to me at some point a number of years ago, that Virginia is much bigger than you think. If you start out in Fairfax and you drive to the northeast, after a few hours, you've crossed 6 states. And if you do the same thing and drive towards the southwest, you're still in Virginia. So we try to make the point that Virginia is both large and diverse, and we had to try to cover all that territory in this report. The report itself is organized in this way. There's an executive summary for our busy readers who only want to get the gist of the thing. We provide an introduction that explains how the report was generated and introduces Virginia's climate. We have a section on Virginia's climate in the recent past, as well as anticipated in the future based on climate model simulations for temperature, precipitation, and sea level. We have chapters that deal with risks, including heat risk, flood risk, drought risk, and compound risks, which means risks that have multiple aspects, either heat and flood together or heat and drought together. And how those might impact various different sectors. We have a whole chapter in the report on exposure to climate hazards, which is another aspect. So there is what are the risks in the first place, but then how much exposure is there to those risks in order to determine what the actual impacts might be. And the report closes with a complete set of references to all the papers that were evaluated, as well as traceable accounts that help readers understand how the conclusions were drawn. The report provides key messages in these 6 areas. There's key messages about temperature and heat risk, key messages about precipitation and flood and drought risk, key messages about sea level, which is extremely important in the coastal zone, Tidewater, Virginia, as well as the tidal rivers, and compound climate events that threaten such things as the power grid and air quality and infrastructure and emergency management. And finally, a note that when we looked at the economic sectors in Virginia, we found that all of the major economic sectors have exposure and are influenced by climate variability and change. So let me drill down on each of these and just give you a summary of what the key messages are in each of these categories. So in our chapter on temperature, we have 3 key messages to deliver, and some of these are not going to be all that radical or surprising or oh my, I didn't realize that reaction. Some of these are going to be, well, of course we knew that, but it's important to document and quantify exactly what these changes look like. So in terms of our key messages about temperature, we note that Virginia has large seasonal and daily variations of temperature, but the most prominent temperature effects are shifts in the extremes. So when we look at extreme cold and extreme warm temperatures, that's where we see the biggest and most impactful changes. Interestingly, in Virginia, even though there's a general warming trend, the extremes at the cold end are actually getting warmer faster than the extremes at the warm end. This has to do with a number of factors relating to the sort of the geographic nature of Virginia, as well as the mid-Atlantic US in general. When we look at projections for future climate, we find a robust and statistically significant warming signal for both the average temperature and the extremes, particularly, of course, extremes at the high end in particular. And this is true across a range of different emission scenarios, which means when we look at potential future, the biggest uncertainty is how human behavior will change and how much carbon dioxide and methane emission we can anticipate in the future. And what we found in the literature was that Virginia really is not terribly sensitive to those different emission scenarios, in the sense that we will see significant changes irrespective of those emission scenarios. Of course, at the higher end emission scenarios, the warming is much larger, but we do see a significant effect for all the different scenarios. When we look at precipitation, our three key messages are that there's a complex interplay in Virginia. There are seasonal variations. There are storms that come from the west and storms that come from the south. We have climate variability influences such as El Nino and the Southern Oscillation, the North Atlantic Oscillation. All of these sort of very large scale or hemispheric scale climate drivers also influence Virginia's precipitation. And then, of course, the fact that we have such a varying topography with high mountains in the west and coastal plain in the east and a Piedmont in between, this also has a big influence on precipitation, both for rainfall and frozen precipitation, sleet and snow. If we look at the trends, Virginia is experiencing wetter conditions overall, particularly at the high end. So thinking about intense precipitation, high intensity precipitation is becoming more frequent, and those intensities are increasing. When we look seasonally at Virginia, we see that spring and fall are getting wetter, particularly at the coast, and summers are getting wetter on the eastern shore. But we also, as I'll mention in a minute, we also see some drying signals as well. When we look at sea level is critically important for a number of important industries, for the US military, which is the largest naval base in Norfolk. And of course, we have large urban centers that are located right on either the Chesapeake Bay or on the tidal rivers that flow into the Chesapeake Bay. So sea level is a very important quantity in Virginia. And of course, it has been rising. This is due to a combination of just the general global sea level rise, but also some local factors. Land subsidence, primarily from the post-ice age rebound of the continental surface, and also from groundwater withdrawal for agriculture. We also see some oceanic and atmospheric influences, such as the slowing down of the Gulf Stream is actually causing sea level rise on the east coast of Virginia. When we look at future projections for sea level, we see that the sea level rise that we have been observing for the past several decades is going to continue and actually accelerate in the next couple of decades, which will cause an acceleration in coastal flooding, both the nuisance flooding and the catastrophic flooding if there are major storms moving along the coast and producing storm surge. The impact of sea level rise has already led to, and we expect it to continue to make changes in the ecosystems, particularly in the Chesapeake Bay and along the shore, in habitat conversion, in groundwater salinization. We're already seeing a loss of cropland in Virginia that is because of saltwater intrusion into the water supply, and of course, erosion. I mentioned that we looked at a number of different risks associated with temperature, precipitation, and sea level changes. And these risks fall into a number of categories. The first one is heat. So when we looked at heat risk, we found that heat risk is increasing, as you would expect with the temperature extremes increasing. And that's actually causing significant health impacts, and healthcare costs are rising associated with climate change. We're seeing heat stresses that are causing problems for infrastructure, primarily transportation infrastructure, and built environments that are critical to Virginians' daily lives. We also see that extreme heat is impacting ecosystems that are important to the livelihoods and well-being of Virginians, particularly in the Chesapeake Bay, where we're seeing species that are under stress as a result of changes in both temperature and salinity. But also throughout the state, we're seeing impacts in ecosystems that are experiencing climate conditions that are unprecedented for them. Looking at flood risk, we break this down into 3 types of flooding. We look at coastal flooding associated with sea level rise. We look at fluvial flooding associated with rivers leaving their banks, and pluvial flooding is really the flash flood associated with intense rainfall. And we're seeing that coastal flooding is getting worse over time, both because of sea level rise and land subsidence, but also storm surges. So when we have either tropical storms or nor'easters that manage to get into the Virginia area, we find that this is causing additional coastal flooding, and that's the intensity of the flooding is increasing. When we look at pluvial and fluvial or riverine flooding, we're seeing these are causing widespread damage. There's intense and frequent rainfall that's leading to flash flood. We're seeing land use changes. Of course, a lot of urbanization has made it much of the surface area in Virginia is now covered with impervious surface, so runoff of water is a bigger problem. And of course, our stormwater infrastructure in the urban areas is aging. A lot of the stormwater infrastructure in Northern Virginia is a century or more old, and so has to undergo maintenance and replacement. We're also seeing communities experiencing flooding due to compound effects. So particularly in the tidewater region and along our tidal rivers, we're seeing the effects of both coastal, riverine, and pluvial flooding all at the same time, frequently from the same event. I've been mostly focusing on flooding and excessive precipitation, but we also worry about the other extreme of precipitation, which is too little precipitation, which causes drought. So drought is a concern in Virginia, even though Virginia and the mid-Atlantic in general is a wet place. Compare Virginia to, say, Arizona or Nevada, and you get the idea that Virginia is in general a wet place. But drought is not insignificant, and it's not particularly infrequent in Virginia, and it is increasing. We've seen a shift towards more frequent short-term droughts over the past 25 years. We tend to call these flash droughts, sort of an analogy to flash flood. Flash droughts come on rather quickly and are very unpredictable. So the problem we have then is that response to flash drought is difficult because we aren't necessarily prepared for the sorts of agricultural or water supply and water quality hazards that may occur as a result of drought. Drought heavily impacts a number of industries in Virginia, including agriculture, forestry, water resources, and data centers, which turn out to be heavily dependent on the water supply. And we find that the western and northern parts of the Commonwealth are most affected by these elevating drought risks. Thinking now about compound risks, which means risks associated with multiple stressors coming from the environment, we see these are also increasing, and particularly these compound hazards are cascading into power outages. We have a sizable fraction of our power transmission infrastructure in Virginia is above ground, and so it's susceptible to lightning strike, to wind damage to power lines, and to flooding in substations and other electrical infrastructure facilities. We're seeing rising temperatures are compounding with local and distant pollution sources and degrading our air quality. Of course, we have local air pollution sources, lots and lots of vehicles in Virginia, as well as some industry and power generation from burning coal and natural gas. We also have distant sources, and they get the pollution that's generated outside of Virginia can be blown into Virginia by the prevailing wind. We also see compound flooding and cascading storm-driven power outages that threaten to overwhelm Virginia's infrastructure and emergency systems. So the problem here is that when there's a storm and we need to have emergency response, a power outage just compounds that problem immensely because it affects communication, affects transportation, and affects our ability to get people into safe places. As I mentioned, we have a whole chapter in the report on exposure. Here we focus primarily on the exposure of economic sectors in Virginia. And what sort of surprisingly we found is that all of the major economic sectors in Virginia and its ecosystems are sensitive to climate change. And of course, climate change is increasing their exposure to the risks, heat risk, flood risk, sea level rise risk, and so on, that affect many activities and pretty much across the entire state, the geography of Virginia, and also all the diverse populations are affected. One of the most important effects of climate change in Virginia is its impact on key economic and employment activities in all 6 of our homogeneous climate divisions that we looked at. And also, one of the important effects of climate change is its impact on critical infrastructure. So I already mentioned about power outages having an impact on emergency management, but we're also seeing impacts on our transportation infrastructure, as well as a number of other critical infrastructure issues that climate is impacting. So since the report came out as just a couple of weeks ago, we've already seen quite a lot of interest and attention, and this is just some samples of headlines coming from radio stations, television stations, newspapers. I wanted to highlight an editorial that just appeared this week in the Virginia Pilot, just because they had a number of really very positive things to say about the report, so I quoted them there on the right. I think an important message that comes from the Virginia Pilot editorial is that, as we intended, climate assessment provides a resource. It's a resource for Virginia's businesses, for Virginia's communities, and importantly for Virginia's policymakers. So the Pilot's editorial sort of directs policymakers to look at the climate assessment and think about how they might make use of it in future lawmaking. So what comes next? We wanted this to be a first of its kind, but not the last of its kind. We would like to have another edition of the Virginia Climate Assessment come out in the future, and hopefully not the distant future. So we have been collecting feedback from our authors, from our reviewers, from stakeholders, users, and just asking them what they would like to see in the next edition of the Virginia Climate Assessment. And so far, most of the feedback we've been getting has fallen into 2 categories. People would like to see even finer scale geographic detail. So we broke down the state into 6 climate divisions. People would like to see even finer scale resolution, perhaps at the Planning District Commission level or even at the county level. And the other thing that we're hearing people ask for is expanded coverage of the impacts on other sectors, agriculture, public health, and so on. This kind of highlights the problem that we face, which is that Virginia does not have a state climate office. So there's no single agency that can be tasked with routinely and periodically producing a climate assessment. And so what is a state climate office? Well, a state climate office has a number of activities, a number of purposes, primarily regarding data collection and production of tools and assessments. I highlighted here on the left on the list of things that state climate offices do is conducting periodic climate assessments, such as the one that we just did. But really, this is it's a routine. I don't want to say routine, but it is a process that they undergo at intervals, so that there are a series of climate assessments, and you can compare one climate assessment with its predecessor to see how things have changed. What state climate offices also do is they maintain and monitor observations of weather and water and climate, and they develop educational tools and help the public gain an understanding of climate risk, weather risk, what to do in the case of emergency situations. And in the map, I'm just highlighting the fact that Virginia is the one and only state in the United States, including Puerto Rico, that does not have a state climate office. There's one other state whose state climate office is not active at the moment. That's Arkansas. But in general, Virginia is the only one that has none, has no climate office. So we've been arguing that Virginia needs a state climate office, not only because we need to have these periodic climate assessments, but also because we have gaps in both our coverage of observations and monitoring and gaps in our understanding. So when we surveyed the literature for the Virginia Climate Assessment, as I mentioned, we found over 300 reports in the peer-reviewed scientific literature that are specific to Virginia. But the reality is that as we reviewed that literature, we found so many holes. We found so many questions that had been left unanswered, specifically about Virginia and specifically about the local scale, the counties within Virginia. Virginia is a very big state, as I mentioned, and it's a very diverse Commonwealth. Many different climates, many different populations, many different businesses and cultures. And everybody, all of the people and all of the businesses and institutions in Virginia deserve access to high quality, accurate, and timely weather and climate information, be it data, be it services, be it technical support, to answer questions they may have and important decisions that they may have to make that depend upon information like that. So we have been proposing that Virginia should get its own state climate office, and we've actually offered to host it at George Mason University. So I'm going to leave it there. On the screen are 2 QR codes. You can scan the first one, and that will take you to the website where the first Virginia Climate Assessment is hosted. And if you would like to get more information from us about activities at the Virginia Climate Center at George Mason, or if you would like to learn more about the process for Virginia Climate Assessment, please scan the code on the right, and we'll be happy to give you access to our email listserv, as well as to all the products that we're producing out of the VCC. And I will stop there, and I will be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. If anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, drop them in the chat. Yeah, we have another almost half an hour for discussion, so please. Liz Johnson, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, I was just wondering if there is an opportunity here to partner with additional universities or organizations in Virginia for the next round?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. So as we were preparing the Virginia Climate Assessment, we engaged people we knew because we wanted to get done quickly. So we reached out to friends and colleagues, both inside George Mason and at other schools, Old Dominion, Virginia Tech, UVA. And for the next one, we would like to be much more systematic. And so we've had a couple of workshops to discuss how we can do that, what sort of I hesitate to use the word governance, but what sort of a organizational scheme we can use to engage all of Virginia's universities and get the best expert advice on how to proceed for the next climate assessment. So yes, we are very interested in doing that, and we're in the process of trying to find a way to make that happen.
Thank you. Let's see. I believe Glenn, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I just would observe that there is a history as to why we may not have a office of climate. That I don't know whether your report goes into or not, but we had a state climatologist who was a climate change denier for the longest time, which and we actually had a couple of climate reports done by Democratic administrations that then were removed from websites and things like that. So there's an interesting history with respect to that work. And do you envision a state climatologist or a climate office, and how would you insulate it from politics?
Well, certainly our intent is to be nonpartisan and to keep it isolated from politics. How we would go about that, of course, we would like to house it at a university. And as you point out, we did have a state climatologist long ago, about 2 decades ago, who was housed at a university. He was at UVA, and he elected to use his office for political purposes. And then of course when administrations changed in the governor's mansion, he ran afoul of that. So we would strive to avoid that at all costs. The whole point of having a science-based center is that it's not political, that it's just the facts, ma'am, and all that we do is rigorous, scientifically based information. I have been in touch. So what happened at University of Virginia after the state climatologist office was disbanded for political reasons, as you point out. I have been in touch with Jerry Stenger, who was the University of Virginia's climatologist. So he ran a climate office at UVA for a few years after the state climate office was abolished. And he has a treasure trove of data that we are hoping to use. He has data going back to the 19th century, and in our report, we actually used Thomas Jefferson's weather logs primarily as just as a point of interest. There has been very little scholarly publication on Jefferson's weather records, but it raised more questions than it answered when we looked at his data, because we found a 4.5 degrees Celsius warming throughout the year relative to from late 18th century to the present. And so is that all global warming? Is that an instrumentation issue? Is it because of the sighting that he had for his temperature, for his thermometers? These are all interesting research questions that we're going to have our students look into. Anyway, I ran off on a tangent there, but to your point, we absolutely positively want to have a nonpartisan state climate office. And irrespective of the fact that climate somehow attracts political intrigue, we would just strive to avoid that.
So I see some questions in the chat. Let's see, have you asked state legislatures to introduce a bill?
So the university, George Mason University, has asked state legislators to include in the budget, in the state budget, a state climate office. We asked this last year with zero budget, with $0. The intent being that George Mason, that once there was a state climate office in imprimatur from the state, then the university would step up to start organizing that. We were unsuccessful. That didn't happen last year. The $0 budget item was not passed by the legislature. So we're going to try again this year, and we're hopeful that we will be able to get enough support to get a state climate office established. But it's much less predictable than the weather.
Great. The next question I see is from Erica Moore. Is there any organization leading advocacy efforts for the creation of a state climate office in the state here?
Well, just us. We have, I mentioned we had a couple of workshops with university thought leaders in October. And the consensus from those meetings was that there ought to be a state climate office, and it ought to be based at a public university in Virginia. And George Mason, as I mentioned, has volunteered to host the state climate office in the future. So in terms of, is there an organization? Well, it's me and the people at George Mason who have been advocating for it most strenuously. But we have the support of a consensus of other academics across Virginia. What we don't have at this point is we don't have an agency that actually is advocating for it. So we would love to learn if there are people who have an interest in helping us advocate for the state climate office.
Thank you. I'm going to go down to the next question I see from David Hirschman. Did the study see any trends in wind, more frequent or intense like wind events?
Wind, did you say?
Yes,
Yeah,
wind.
wind. So we did not look at wind. There are two issues with that. One is that the literature is much more scanty on wind, and that's because of the other reason, which is that the data is not as prevalent. There's a tremendous volume of data for surface temperature measurements. It's relatively easy to set up a 2-meter high sheltered weather station and then collect temperature measurements from that. Similarly, pressure and humidity measurements in the same sort of 2-meter sheltered weather station are relatively easy to collect and easy to calibrate and easy to maintain. Wind measurements, not so much. The winds are typically measured 10 meters. We need very well calibrated anemometers to do that. So there's just not as much data. We have a number of remote sensing capabilities, but they're very good at measuring temperature, very good at measuring what are called hydrometeors, meaning the things that make up precipitation, rain and sleet and snow and so on. We don't have as good remote sensing capabilities to monitor the wind. So one of the gaps that we identified in our report is what can we do to understand trends in the wind? We do have what are called reanalysis data sets, and we are looking at those currently. We have students looking at the reanalysis data. The best one is one that comes from the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasts in the UK. So we have students who are looking at that, but no publications exist to my knowledge about trends in wind in Virginia.
Thank you. Let's see here. I'm trying to make sure I don't skip any questions. Heidi Hahn has a couple questions. Could you share what the primary funding source was for the assessment? And were there particular existing data sources that you found especially valuable or relied on more heavily during the assessment?
Yes. So there was no specific funding for the Virginia Climate Assessment. What we did to make it a reality was we had funding. I mentioned we have our congressionally directed community support grant that had a task element in the original proposal was about assessment, and we used that to support an in-house person who helped us. Well, the first author for the report was funded out of that, as well as the formatting and we had a contractor help us build the report format-wise. So that beautiful the beautiful organization, the report that you'll find on the web was paid for by that grant. It's a very small amount of money. Almost all of the work, well, in fact, yes, almost all of the work from authors tracking down scientific resources and producing their assessments of those scientific resources and drawing conclusions that go into the key messages in each chapter was all volunteer, for which this is why I took pains to thank everybody at the very beginning, because it was a monumental effort that was not funded in any specific way other than one person working on the content and one person working on the formatting. So we are hoping that for the next edition, we would be able to get more systematic support. You can go back to the well and ask volunteers to do things only so many times, and then you have to do something that's more systematic. Your other question was about data sets. So most of the assessment is with respect to already published peer-reviewed literature and the data that are referred to in those papers. So you'd have to go back and look at the references in those 327 papers to see what data sets they were using. We do mention some of the data sets in the report so that it's a little bit easier to track down. There were two data sets that we used for generating some of the graphics in the report and for illustrating the trends and the quantitative information that's in the report. One of those is the one I already mentioned. It's this. It's called the European Center Reanalysis version 5, or ERA 5. That's a public data set. It's an enormous data set. It runs to the hundreds of terabytes of data, but we downloaded a substantial fraction of that, and then produced some of the analyses that are in the report based on that data set. Another data set that we used is a product from NASA, where they used what's called a downscaling technique to take analyses of meteorological data that are at a relatively coarse geographic scale and reduce that geographic scale to a 4 kilometer by 4 kilometer grid. So we use those data as well, and that includes data that that reference the past climate, the most recent half century of the Earth's climate, as well as projections of future climate in a couple of different scenarios. So we also use those data to get at some of the finer scale details within Virginia. And that's also a public, both of those are public domain data sets that anybody can access.
Great. So one other question is from Glenda Booth. Did you examine tidal wetlands migration and its impacts?
We did not, and there was some publications that we reviewed for the assessment about saltwater intrusion, but we did not look at tidal wetlands specifically. And I will point out that you're not the first one to mention that. As I mentioned, that we've been soliciting feedback from our authors, our reviewers, our readers, our stakeholders on what the next edition of the climate assessment should be. And that is one of the things that is high on the list, to understand how tidal wetlands are being impacted by climate change, and migration being one of them, but also species diversity and salinity. So all of those aspects of the tidal wetlands are things that we would like to look at in the next edition.
So this is a easy question to answer. Can you share the slides? Or will you be able to share the slides after this? Or if you give them to me, we can send a PDF out to the registrants.
Yeah, happy to.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
so
and
other
Tricia,
than that,
Tricia, I already gave you the slides.
Yeah.
So if
I'll
you
just
want me
put
to make a
those in
PDF, or if
and
you want to
send
make
them out.
either one.
Okay. I will send the slides out then after this. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Does anybody else? Did I miss one? You're welcome to raise your hand. Annette, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. What I'm wondering is we would love, now I'm on the board of a Charlottesville area group called Seaville 100 Climate Alliance, and we've been talking about doing presentations, ideally live, but potentially virtual, that would invite members of the more general community, because it's, often the choir that hears all this. And this is one of our goals for the coming year. So we would love to, we have actually an engineer from UVA is on our board, actually is chairman of our board. So he has brought in students and had student interaction too, but we'd love to have a meeting, ideally in person, but it, again, could be virtual, that would involve community members, of course, the city county folks who are doing a lot on climate action and resilience, and the students, got to get them involved, because folks generally don't know what's going on at either the state level or through university research. And it's just so important that they know there is an effort here to delve into the particular climate impacts in Virginia, again, for policymakers. It's local and state policymakers, that need to hear this.
Right.
We would love to circle back to you, about something that could be set up.
Happy to. I mean, you mentioned the choir. I'm sort of listening like the choir to what you're saying. We're very much in favor of that. The issue we have is, and I think this is partly because there has not been a state climate office to organize things, but also just there are enormous resources in Virginia. Your organization, Resilient Virginia being one of them, but also all the universities, the state agencies, there's DEM, DEQ, and there are just a plethora of resources, as well as a number of NGOs who are focused on the Chesapeake Bay. So the problem is that everybody is going in different directions. They have their pet data sets, they have their mission, they have whatever their particular focus is. And if you're just interested, if you're just a citizen, you just want to know the answer to some question, you can spend a lot of time and get frustrated just trying to find out who knows the answer. So one of the things we would really like to do is organize all that, not to do it all in one place, certainly not, but to make it so that there is one place where you can go to find out, how do I find out? And that just educating the public and having that sort of an educational mission, it's a thing we do at universities. So we would certainly love to help with that as much as we possibly can.
Fantastic. Well, we will circle back. I mean, wearing the hat for CVO 100, and I know obviously Resilient Virginia will continue to work with you all on getting the word out about your report. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, Trish, I think there were a couple more questions.
There were, and if you're looking at them, I don't have to read them out loud, or I can.
Yeah, no, I see. I
Okay.
caught up to you.
Okay, good.
Yeah, see, Douglas Mosley has asked, has been an attempt to create a charter for the State Climate Office. Well, so the answer to that is yes and no. We have certainly been trying to create such a thing based out of George Mason University, but it's not something the university can do unilaterally. We need to get the imprimatur from the state. So what we're hoping, and hope is not a strategy, I understand that, but we are hoping that we will be able to get enough support in the legislature, either in the upcoming session next month or in the months to come, to establish the State Climate Office, and then and establish a process for writing the charter and a governance plan. And I mentioned that we're very keen to make sure that any state climate office that gets established has a governance plan that involves all the universities in Virginia in some substantive way. So because the big problem we have is that what I was just mentioning is there's a diversity of activities and a lack of coordination. And what we'd hope is that the State Climate Office could provide that function. I see Joanna has a question. How will this information be transferred to state or local planning efforts? So we're in touch with, Virginia has a relatively newly established Office of Resilience. This is a state agency that was established in 2022 by statute and was only populated with staff this year. We have a state officer, for a state resilience officer. His name is Greg Steele. And of course, he serves at the pleasure of the governor, and we are changing governors next month. So we shall see if Greg Steele continues to be the state resilience officer. But nevertheless, we're in touch with that office, and we see their linkage to all of the other relevant state agencies as a pathway to transfer this information. They are aware that we generated the climate assessment and are very supportive. So we're hopeful that will all work out. Yeah, Alan, go ahead.
Alan, yeah.
Hey, I don't want to rehash something that's already been chatted through, but this issue is one that is going to be probably discussed and moves back and forth on like a political pendulum. And so I was wondering if any states have done a member voting process, a stakeholder process, rather than a state legislative process. It seems like the legislative process, and I understand that you've evaluated and that's the direction that you've chosen to go. But it also doesn't seem like that will hold up very strongly in our divided nation. And so wondering if wonder if we could just bounce back to a process where you gain stakeholders such as NGOs or university departments, climate engaged nonprofits or entities, and do a democratic process of having people elect the climate office rather than go through the legislative process that reached challenges last year.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we've looked at the state climate offices across the U.S., and it's a mixed bag. In some cases, somebody just declares him or herself the state climatologist and starts publishing data. And in most cases, I don't know if this is true, if it's most cases, but in the plurality of states, it's mandated by law that there shall be a state climate office, and it's typically located at a state university, often at the land grant school, which in Virginia would be Virginia Tech or Virginia or VCU, but it doesn't have to be at the land grant school. So that's kind of the gold standard, and that's why we started trying to get legislative support for a state climate office. If that fails and there's a groundswell of opinion in favor of it, then yes, we can look at Plan B or C or D and see what other possibilities there are. But I mean, we're shooting for the best possible situation, which would be legislation that establishes the state climate office, and then everything falls into place after that. Let's see. Yes. Okay.
Oh,
so
yeah, there you go.
I see Corinne Bowers has, for those of us who want to support the creation of a climate office, do you have a call to action? The best thing to do is to send me email. We have a white paper that was developed at these workshops I mentioned in October that we've been circulating to state agencies and state representatives, of course, university administrations. If people would like a copy of that white paper, I'll be happy to share it. We can share it through Trish and Resilient Virginia. But if people want to help, I think the best thing is to send me an email, which is I think it's on the announcement for this event. But if it's not, I'm sure Trish can share it with everybody. And I'd be happy to respond to people's emails and we'll start waving the flag on the barricade or whatever it takes to make it happen. Let's see. I see Brian has a question. Would faculty transitions and changes be a problem for the office being located at one particular university campus? Well, actually, we view the placement in a state university as an advantage. If it's in some states, the climate office is a state agency, and just like one of the questions we had early on, once it's in a state agency, it's a little more, maybe a lot more susceptible to political persuasions, political pressure. And so if it's at a university, then it's at least one step further removed from political pressure, even though that didn't help in the case of Virginia's old climate office from a couple of decades ago. But still, we see that as an advantage. And the fact that, at George Mason, one of our advantages is that we have an entire department which is dedicated to climate. We have 3-degree programs in climate. We have a critical mass of faculty who are experts in climate dynamics, climate change, climate variability, the physics of climate, the chemistry of climate. So we have that advantage of a large number of people who are engaged. We're in close contact with colleagues at Virginia Tech and at Old Dominion University, at James Madison. So we know people, and we would take great pains to network with our colleagues at other universities. So I think that provides the sort of stability and continuity that typically you don't necessarily get in a state agency, where you might, as we're seeing, political pressures can have an impact. Okay,
Thank you.
I got a clarification from Carolyn about the Virginia Office of Resilience. It's not a state agency; it's an office within Secretariat. Yeah, that's true. Thank you for that. For me, it's a nuance, that the difference between an agency and an office within a secretariat. But you're absolutely right that Greg Steele reports to the governor, or actually, I guess he reports to the secretary of Natural and Historic Resources, who reports to the governor. So yeah, it's not an agency. I see a comment. Is that a question from Eric? I'd like to think beyond universities. New York State effort involved institutions across the country, and all institutions bring others into help. We're very open to bringing others into help. In fact, if you look at the climate assessment, you'll see that the Center for Climate Strategies, which is a nonprofit think tank, helped us when we were looking at the economic exposure aspect. So we're very open to engaging with other entities, and we just need to know who they are and how they would like to contribute, or how they would like to work with us. And I see mostly thank yous coming, so I guess we're out of time anyway. And
I think
I'll
we're
stop.
doing great. Well, I will send out the slides, and I will send out your email address to
Great.
everybody. Thank you all for joining, and thank you, Dr. Kinter, for the wonderful presentation and taking time out of your day to do this. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and we will see you later.
Great.
Bye.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.